So for the last 18 months or so, our campaign has been very much about exposing the impacts of logging on climate, and that's something that's been more and more understood is the role that forests play in drawing down carbon from the atmosphere. And so there's two issues there. One is that there's already too much carbon in the atmosphere, right? So we need all of the intact forests that we have left to be absorbing that carbon out of the atmosphere. And there was a study done in 2016 that said that the emissions that were coming from fossil fuels were 6.5 times the amount that the vegetation that we have left on the planet is able to absorb. So already 5 years ago, and it's only gotten worse since then, we had too much emissions going into the atmosphere for the vegetation to be able to absorb. And already, because of the legacy of what we've been doing for the last several decades, there's already too much carbon in the atmosphere. So the idea now that logging trees, burning the wood, and then allowing trees to regrow and absorb that carbon is just it's a physical and political nonsense. People, they're making up an idea that over maybe 100 or 200 years, the emissions that you create from burning wood will then be reabsorbed by the trees. Well, we haven't got 200 years to wait to deal with climate change, and we need those trees that are standing now to be absorbing that carbon. So there's a push internationally and at a federal Australian level to increase the amount of wood that's used to generate energy, but we know that in fact biomass produces more emissions per unit of energy generated than coal and gas do. So it's not a climate friendly or carbon neutral solution at all. And what we need to be doing is shifting our thinking. It's not just about renewable energies, it's not just about fossil fuels. We need to be stopping burning carbon-based fuels in order to bring down the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere. And of course we also need to be protecting forests for all of their biodiversity and water and cultural values. And when we create these new industries like biomass, we create perverse incentives for logging. So in WA, the next big thing that we're going to be dealing with, and in fact I know I keep giving you numbers, but there's more than one, we also have to deal with Alcoa and Worsley with South 32 these days and the bauxite mining. We also need to deal with the fire management problem that we have. But in terms of this transition away from logging, we need to deal with thinning. And there's no coherent assessment yet from government about what that thinning program is going to look like. So it could end up going two ways. And our job is to make sure it goes the right way and we deal with some of those legacy issues that Mikey was talking about, that we've left behind these regenerated forests that aren't in very good health, that aren't resilient to the impacts of climate change, that are thirstier. But how do we do that? And the answer is, well, we need to get ecological restoration experts and traditional owners to guide how we do that. If we have foresters out the front, we're going to have biomass, and we're going to have heavy machinery, and we're going to have people who look at the forest as a resource, planning for a future resource. We've had enough of that, and we've made a good size fuss, and we've stopped that kind of cultural way of looking at the forest finally here in WA. So we have to make sure we get the detail right now, and that any thinning programs are limited to immature regrowth and mine site rehab, and that the programs are designed by restoration ecologists and traditional owners who can make sure that we're actually genuinely looking after the ecological health of those forests, not just coming up with logging under a new name.